What's up, YouTube? It's time for a review of the new Morbid Angel record, Kingdoms Disdained, out 2 Fridays ago, December 1st. This will be my last metal review of 2017 before we get into lists and all that fun stuff, but this is a big one that we're finishing off on. Ever since Morbid Angel announced this record a couple months ago now, I've just been so curious to hear it. Because personally, out of all the critical pioneers that came out of the late 80s and early 90s death metal scene, besides the band Death, Morbid Angel are by far my favorite. And I think we can all agree at least that if death metal had a big four like thrash metal does, you'd have to put Morbid Angel in. I mean, just look at the fucking catalog, which, by the way, when I get back on my discography ranking grind, I've got one in the can already for Carcass, but Morbid Angel is going to be a top priority because there's just so much to talk about with them. First, you have those first 3 records, which to most people are undisputed classics. And by that third one, Covenant, Morbid Angel had become, along with Cannibal Corpse and a couple other bands, simply put one of the biggest death metal bands of all time. Then after Covenant, there's the band's divisive 4th record, Domination, where the tempo switched up a bit and guitarist Eric Rutan came into the fold and brought with him a bit of a different sound. And of course, after Domination, we have Act 2 of Morbid Angel's career, where vocalist bassist David Vincent actually left the band and was replaced by Steve Tucker. And that lineup produced most notably the album Formulas Fatal to the Flesh, which some fans say is like the greatest death metal album ever made, and some fans barely acknowledge it. And that Steve Tucker incarnation of Morbid Angel is essentially the one we get on this new record, Kingdoms Disdained. At least 2 of the members, those being Tucker and of course guitarist Trey Azagthoth. This time around, if we're following the Morbid Angel catalog chronologically, the bar has been set pretty fucking low by the last album under the Morbid Angel name, which I'm not even going to say the title. But what happened was David Vincent rejoined the band, decided to make, for some reason, this horrible industrial metal attempt, and then promptly leave again. So for Morbid Angel fans, myself included, people just want to hear the band back on track here. First and foremost, they want to hear death metal, which shouldn't be a thing that we have to say, but there you go. They want to hear exhilarating speeds. They want to hear savage guitar riffs, dark lyrics, chaotic rhythms. Basically what they want is just at least some version of what they got on those first 5 Morbid Angel albums especially. But here's the thing. We've got to be really careful here because context is everything. So assuming that you've either already listened to this record or you're about to, while you listen to this, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. 1, if this album were under a name other than Morbid Angel, how would I feel about it? And 2, if Morbid Angel's last record wasn't one of the biggest missteps in the history of extreme metal, would that change my perception of this one? And the reason I pose these 2 questions is because once my initial fanboy excitement started to wear off, it became very apparent to me how fucking average this album is. Now, the record starts off strong as hell with the opening track, Piles of Little Arms, which is one of my favorite songs on the record. That intro riff is super catchy. And I think, you know why I think it's catchy? Is because of that little rhythmic start-stop of those first 2 notes, you know, boom, because I feel like it gives it a certain memorable bounce. My favorite part of the track is towards the middle, where the 2 guitars split and play parts that are very different to one another, but are also complementary. With one guitar covering more of the accented chugging in the bottom end, and the other guitar playing a tremolo part. It's a really powerful sound, and drummer Scott Fuller, right off the bat, is a fucking animal. Real busy, unpredictable fills, absolutely pummeling blast sections. He's clearly a very good choice for what Morbid Angel seem to be going for on this record. But unfortunately, as we get deeper into the track list, and especially with repeated listens, this record's flaws really start to jump out at me. And the biggest one is, even though it's not that long, there is so much wasted space in this record, and particularly within the bodies of these individual songs. There's a trend on many of these tracks where a great idea or 2 is introduced, but then is subsequently squandered by just filler, wasted section here, dull riff there. Sometimes things just get too repetitive. It's a shame because many of these individual slices of ideas are gold, but then they kind of get mired in the mediocrity that surrounds them. A great example is the song Garden of Disdain. I love that hideous main groove where the guitars just sound straight out of a fucking swamp. It's one of the highlights of the entire album for me. But then the song goes nowhere from there. After that part, they then introduce this very simple, very boring that consumes like the next couple minutes of the song before giving way to then watered down variations on that initial groove. So now we're diluting that too before we get back to this just very vapid bum, 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 bum. There are just so many holes in this song structure. If you're having a little trouble following along with the specifics of what I'm talking about, in the very eloquent way that I tend to describe death metal riffs, I totally understand, as long as I'm getting my main gripe across, which is that many of these songs will introduce a sick part or two and then fail to build on it, fail to keep the momentum up. Another unfortunate example is Architect and Iconoclast, which, that sort of spastic opening riff is literally my favorite riff on the album. The lumbering chorus in this song is fantastic too, with lyrics like, the soil, the air are my creations, and I shall watch them burn. I love that line, it's fucking badass. But then as the song progresses, it becomes clear to me that the band could have literally trimmed 2 full minutes of fat off of this fucking song. It would have made it way sharper, way more focused, way less convoluted. Because if you have a catchy riff and an attention-grabbing chorus, you're already 60% of the way there. There's no need to toss in all these completely throwaway riffs and blast sections, like that minute of music that happens from like 2:35 on this song to 3:35, then again 4:05 to 5:05, especially with that uninspired guitar solo that happens. As a listener, it's just frustrating to have to wade through these sections to get to the parts that I actually like. Structurally speaking, a death metal song doesn't have to be this labyrinth if the parts don't call for it. Same thing goes for the song The Pillars Crumbling. I really dig that verse riff and Scott Fuller's noodly drum parts that go so well with it. Then the song goes off in a lot of much less entertaining directions, especially that speed-picked lead at the end of the song that just gets dragged out. Holy shit. So what ends up happening here is that all my favorite parts on the album are spread out across different tracks with miles of these little hurdles of underwhelming music to slog through in order to get to the highlights. And that's just not how this style of music should be. Death metal, and brutal death metal especially, should just be bam, 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 bam. You shouldn't have time to be bored, because the songs should just attack you from all angles and move on before you know it hit you. And just for comparison, a song on here like From the Hand of Kings, that represents more what I had hoped for from this album. That song is fucking sick. It's just a barrage of punishing but catchy riffs, some unbelievable drumming, some cool quotable lyrics to kind of take home with you. There's the line, kings mean nothing without fools, which is now one of my favorite sayings. And most importantly, it's a song where every chronological part is essential. There's not a part that pops up that I say, why is this in this song? It flows a lot better than the tracks that I've already criticized. And the other main thing that's just made it difficult for me to love this album, and this might be more of a taste thing, is just the completely impenetrable sound of it. It's just 45 minutes plus of completely unyielding aggression, and sonically just like 99% low end going by at warp speed. It's just this wall of meanness with no nuance and no diversity to it. Personally, I find Kingdoms Disdained to be a challenging listen, but not like good challenging, like for example Gorguts' Obscura album, where the complexity and the difficulty of the listening experience ends up being deeply rewarding and invigorating, even just because of the unbelievable dynamics and intricacy of what's going on. Kingdoms Disdained, on the other hand, I find that when I'm listening to it, I'm taking a lot of abuse with little in the way of reward. This music feels like it's brutal just to be brutal, fast just to be fast, angry just to be angry, difficult just to be difficult, and it just leaves me feeling kind of uninspired. Because the Morbid Angel that I know is way more dynamic than this record. But I'd never sit here and say that this is like a bad album. It's just really, really average. And for the people watching who are just over the moon about how good this is, I'm really happy for you and I'm gonna let you finish. But let's just take it back to those first 2 contextual questions that I asked at the beginning of the review. Honestly, would you care about this record if this wasn't Morbid Angel? And if fast, brutal, uncompromising extreme metal is your thing, before this record, I'd have to recommend, and this isn't just because there's a personnel association here, but the last Hate Eternal record, Infernus, from a couple years ago. More recently from this year, I have to recommend the new Origin record, Unparalleled Universe. way more brutal and way more memorable than this record. Also, Immolation's new record, Atonement. There's just a lot out there that scratches that itch better than this new Morbid Angel record does. But hey, either way, Morbid Angel, you gotta give them credit. They did kind of clean up their legacy with this one, and we can kind of forget that that last atrocity ever happened. I'm not too crazy about the result, but I can definitely sleep better at night when I think about Morbid Angel's legacy, I guess. Kingdoms Disdained gets a 5 out of 10 from me. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, or shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music, and I'll see you guys soon.